Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Pediatric Innovation Training capsule of today. So today we will have our fourth training, and the topic will be focused on regulation and on the topic of medical device regulation and drugs for pediatrics, how to navigate within the regulatory ocean. For today's capsule, we will have 1 hour of training. And this session will be recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube channel of i4Kids. Please have your microphone muted during the presentation, but interaction will be welcome at the end during the Q&A. But also, if you have a question during the presentation, don't hesitate to leave your question in the chat, and we will answer directly to it if you have a concrete question. Before to jump directly into the topic, I would like to introduce a bit i4Kids Europe for those who are not familiar with it. So i4Kids Europe come from a lack of European focus on pediatric innovation, where health innovation still tends to focus on elderly people. And there is also a problem of fragmentation of the ecosystem, where emerging and moderate countries are a bit excluded from the innovation. So that's why a European Pediatric Innovation Network is needed, and that's what i4Kids Europe aims to do. We create this European Horizon Europe project with the 8 members that you can see here in the map from 5 different countries in Europe. It aims at tackling the challenge in pediatric innovation and enlarge the current i4Kids initiative from San Juan de Deu. And with all these partners, we will allow synergy and reduce difference between strong and emerging innovator ecosystem, as well as strengthen the innovation competitiveness of the European pediatric sector. So some insight about what we have done until now. So we are really glad to share with you today that we launched this morning the Europe Pediatric Innovation Situation Report and Needs Analysis, which is a report which details all the challenges that are existing in pediatric innovation and some recommendation to help with it. It is available in this link or in the i4Kids LinkedIn. So don't hesitate to read it or read the executive summary, which is a bit shorter. And we are also doing this 12 pediatric innovation training capsule, and that's why you are here today. And we have based this pediatric innovation training capsule on the challenges that we identify in this report. And one of the main challenges that has been identified, the second main barrier identified, has been the regulatory for all the stakeholders in Europe. And that's why we really wanted to do this training capsule to focus on these regulatory topics in pediatrics. And we are really glad to count with Xavier Luria, which is here with us today to share with us this knowledge. He's an independent consultant on drugs and medical devices, but I will let him introduce him more in details. So please, Xavier, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charlotte, and your entire team for the invitation and for your very, very nice help on preparing this presentation for today. My name, as Charlotte already mentioned, is Xavier Luria. I'm a medical doctor, specialist in internal medicine, and I have been during a number of years conducting clinical trials for pharma industry in Europe, US, Japan, and some other territories. And later on, I was head of safety and efficacy of medicines at the EMA when we were very luckily in London before the Brexit. And this was the time where when most of the current regulations were either approved or start implementation. So a fantastic time to see how the current, and to explain how the current European regulatory picture is. Later on, I have been in my own company, and later on in Veristat, and today I'm an independent consultant. I will share my presentation. Just 1 second, please. Okay, I hope you see my first slide correctly.
Yes.
All right, then that's the way that to explore during this hour, that in fact will be less because we will have a time for question and answers, the regulatory landscape affecting the development of drugs and medical devices in Europe. And what I must say at the very beginning are two things. One, this is usually the topic for more than 1 week training in other courses. Therefore, I made an effort to concentrate many of the messages, but I try to highlight the most relevant for you. But of course, if you want to go deeper, you need later on to devote additional time and efforts on exploring the details of some of these regulations. And the second, you will see that some of the slides that I have included, I will not read all of them, so for your benefit and my own benefit as well, but I included for your preference. For example, when I'm relating to specific regulations, directive, or guidelines, I included a particular slide when they are referred to. Therefore, it's just for you to have exactly the appropriate reference. This is my disclaimer. Basically, I'm not speaking on behalf of any agency today. Therefore, I have not any issue with conflict of interest. All the information is publicly available. And the only thing, excuse me, 1 second. The only thing, sorry, because I have another telephone here. Excuse me. And therefore, all these slides can be used with no problem, but the source should be acknowledged. We will go in basic index through the medicines regulatory development in Europe, medical devices, and in vitro. And then there are two sections that I think could be of relevance for you. One is regulatory development strategy in general terms. And a fourth topic that I believe is of major importance today is the ongoing new European pharma legislation. This is ongoing, but this will lead probably to major changes on many of the things that I will explain today, therefore, but this is not concluded, and I will let you know as much as I know today. So, and as I say, this is an ongoing process. These are the learning objectives for today. So basically to understand the basics of drug and medical devices regulations in Europe, analyze the main opportunities for development of medical devices, the review and main issues on regulatory development strategy, and as I say, an update on the new pharma legislation in Europe. In principle, the first important thing is to differentiate clearly what we are talking about, either medical products, medicinal products, or medical devices. Remember that the medicinal product is the name we give in Europe to drugs. So in the US, drugs is the equivalent to the European medicinal products. What's relevant is to distinguish clearly the definition between the two. And you will see later that when you have a product in your hands, you have to identify where to allocate the product. In principle, major differences could be medicinal product or drug or medical devices. And there are others that we will see later. But basically, a medicinal product is those substance or combination of substance which are exerting a pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic action, while the medical devices are instrument, apparatus, appliance, software, many articles. And the important feature is that they are not achieving the principal intended action by any pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic means. Therefore, that's clearly a basic differentiation between the two types of product that you should consider. Going first to the European Medicines Agency, it was opened in London back in 1995, and now is in Amsterdam as a consequence of the Brexit, and is an organization, a European organization. It belongs to the European Commission in the legal form of an agency. In Europe, there are many agencies for different topics. This one is for medicines and is in charge of managing the centralized procedure that we'll see that in a minute. What is that? The network, it provides a network of scientific advice and scientific opinions, coordinate a number of things, for example, pharmacovigilance and inspections, and also provide a number of databases and other IT tools to the agency itself, but also to the member states. Remember that in terms of marketing authorization and many other legal actions, except for pediatrics, by the way, but what the EMEA issues are opinions, scientific opinions, with a number of legal grounds, of course, but scientific opinions. And is up to the European Commission to issue the legally binding European marketing authorization. And these apply to many other, for example, the orphan designation and other outcomes from the EMA. Also, very basically, we have two ways to get a product approved in Europe. One is the centralized procedure, which is always via the EMA, and the other one will be a number of, I call them non-centralized procedures, and they are the mutual recognition, the decentralized, and also there is still national licenses. We'll see first the centralized procedure, which basically is that from the central point, the EMEA, the approval of a product, authorization for a marketing of a product is immediately effective in all the 27 member states in Europe. Therefore, there are a number of consequences at the level of each member state in terms of using the different languages, implementing all the outcomes from the EMEA assessment. But that's the basic thing, is that the product is approved once and is immediately effective in all markets in Europe. While the second approach, mutual recognition, decentralized, whatever it is, we are talking about that the company, in agreement with the relevant national, we call national competent authorities, the national agency, regulatory agency, agree to act as a reference member state, and then the company say, well, I want that this procedure is also affecting these and these countries, different countries. Could be 3, could be 27, could be 1. But then it could be more than one on top of the reference member state. And therefore, the mutual recognition and decentralized is affecting only to the countries where the company intends to get the marketing authorization. And the advantage of using that system is that they are following a common approach and a common, let's say, outcome of the assessment and a common SMPC. The important thing, however, is not only on the marketing authorization, but how to deal with the development of drugs during the period prior to the marketing authorization application. And around the EMEA, within the EMEA, but as in the form you will see of a puzzle, we have first, the scientific advice and protocol assistance. This is a specific working party of the EMEA belonging to the CHMP. CHMP is the Committee for Human Medicinal Products and is the main committee affecting to drugs in Europe for all the medicines. And we'll see later a little bit more on that. And the scientific advice is a key piece on that because you can get advice from the agency regarding the development of your product for all the aspects, including quality, non-clinical, and clinical. Therefore, and you can repeat, you can back and forth several times to scientific advice. Therefore, it could be extremely useful to access to this approach from to this way of interact with regulators as early as possible, as we will see later. Therefore, that's one of the key pieces of the European development for drugs. Additionally, we have the pediatric requirements coming from the PDCO, the Pediatric Committee. We will devote some time later on regarding the new European regulations, but the pediatric became also an essential part of the European regulation of medicines years ago. But for you to know, for example, all the medicines in Europe, including those only intended for adults, must go through the PDCO to get either a pediatric investigation plan approved and or a waiver. But let's say a product cannot be submitted and the submission is not validated if there is not such a, let's say, pediatric requirement accomplished. That's an important step, and we will come back later on that. Another important point are the orphan designation. You know, this refers to rare diseases. This also will be an essential piece for the new European regulation. And this has been, I would say, personally, I would say that this has been an extremely successful regulatory tool because we have been able to facilitate that many medicines for rare diseases are really approved and first recognized as orphan, getting all the incentives, and later on approved for marketing. Then the CHMP that I already mentioned is the one assessing the marketing authorization applications, but also taking care of all the many other activities, variations, for example, of products already approved, or referrals, which means issues where through the mutual recognition and the decentralized procedure, there is no agreement between the member states. There are a number of ways to get a consensus, but if not, finally, the procedure will end up with what is called a referral, and the referral is managed by the CHMP. The CHMP is held by a number of working parties. I mentioned here two that are standing working parties, biologicals, quality, and some others, but it's important to mention that there are many other working parties and also scientific advisory groups supporting the CHMP in their work. The CHMP is composed by one representative from each member state, plus representative from patients and others. So it's a group of, on top of the individual one representative per member state, there are also alternates from each member state. So it's a group of 50 or 60 some that meets once a month during 4 days at the EMA facilities. The PRAC is probably the latest, if I'm not wrong, the latest committee approved, which is intended for pharmacovigilance, basically for safety. And an important feature is that it doesn't cover only the centralized approved product, but also the non-centralized approved product. So it refers to many products that are in the European market, historically approved by different pathways, regulatory pathways. And I wanted also to mention here the SME office, which help companies, small companies, and startups and so on to get a number of incentives. I did not include here, but I would like to mention the CAT. The CAT is the Committee for Advanced Therapies, because they refer to this type of therapies, this type of medicinal products, which are targeting genes or cells, and they have or tissues, and they are very specific, and is integrated within the evaluation of the CHMP. But the CAT is also an important committee here. And finally, the contribution from the national regulatory agencies, which provide rapporteurs, assessors, and experts to the central system. The EMEA is not responsible for all these things. Look at that. That's important to recognize. They are not responsible for analytical testing, food, cosmetic, tobacco, clinical trial authorization. By the way, important to have this in mind. And also medical devices, although the most recent regulations on medical devices gave some roles to the EMEA, as also we will discuss later. The regulatory procedures in Europe, just to have a map of how it works, we have the competent regulatory agencies, we have the applicable law, regulation, and guidance, we have the clinical trial authorization and marketing authorization. And for your reference, I leave here the specific websites for all the competent regulatory agencies, the most relevant regulation, directive. There are many others, honestly, but that's the most relevant for you to know. The clinical trial authorization, how this is managed, and remember, clinical trials in Europe are managed by the national regulatory agencies and not by the EMA, although the EMA, for example, provides advice through the scientific advice on how to conduct a clinical trial, but ultimately the approval of the clinical trial is up to the national competent authorities and the marketing authorizations. The main goals, remember, for the regulatory function, that's important because it is not, the remit is not only for example, safety. Sometimes when we are talking about products, we perhaps emphasize a lot of safety. Is as important as the efficacy, as important as the quality, and also the agencies have an additional important function on promoting innovation and research, and also contributing to public health. So this is another puzzle of all the responsibilities of the regulatory function that is important to bear in mind. If we come back to the previous slide on the medicinal products and medical devices, we have different types of medicinal products, the chemical, biological, biosimilar, advanced therapy, generics, etc. And we have also different types of medical devices. Even with the new regulations, we continue having these 4 classes, and depending, they are based on risk. And I think it's important to distinguish exactly what is the product that we had in hands. And very important as well is the combination product. So when we have a product, a medical device with a product, with a substance administered through this medical device, this is a combination product. And that's very important to distinguish exactly the type of regulatory pathway. That is only for remember the differences between the two. And here we have some examples when, for example, we have a device intended to administer a medicinal product, no? But it's not integral. Then this is regulated as a medical device only. But as soon as the device and the drug form an integral product, and the example, for example, are the pens with insulin, where you are not including, you have not the sharings taking insulin from another deposit. This is an integral part of the product. Then this is regulated as a medicinal product. Then we have also cases of regulation as medical devices, for example, some incorporating a medicinal product, which is a blood derivative, or what we call a substance that is considered ancillary. In these cases, this will be regulated as medical device. And I wanted also to include a fourth example when we are talking about advanced therapies. And this is also an important point because we can have a device with an advanced therapy, with a product that is classified as advanced therapy, and then this is regulated as an advanced therapy medicinal product. So the examples are various, and I strongly recommend that many times we have something that we call the borderline products. There are many borderline products, and therefore it is important to distinguish, and sometimes we have to go to the EMEA and request to the ITF, one of them, I will not go now in detail on that, but to one of the groups of the EMEA to provide advice on the classification of the product, what the product is exactly, because depending how it is classified, the regulatory procedure, the regulatory process will be different, and the development also can be affected. Regarding the medical devices, we had three, well, traditionally, during many years, we had three main directives, which after a very long period of debates and draft back and forth, finally, they end up on medical devices regulation issue in 2017, and also in the same year, a second one on in vitro diagnostic regulations. The two were applicable from May 21, the first one, medical devices, and from May 22nd, the in vitro diagnostics. And they are introducing major changes on the European framework for medical devices. The key changes, this is a summary of the key changes. Honestly, I cannot enter for the sake of time with the details of each of them. But the first is that the new medical device regulation, MDR, has a stronger focus on clinical evidence. That's a very important thing that previously was not so emphasized. Excuse me. The UDI device identifier and also the UDI production identifier, these are important tools to have all the products in Europe well identified and trackable. The UDAMET, an integrated electronic system, also to have a complete view for all the stakeholders on medical devices. Classification rules that continue with many of the previous, but also adding some new rules. And therefore, we have had today a total of 22, which they are described in the Annex 8 of the regulation. Safety and performance requirements. You can see here that they are the relevant annex for you to refer to. Clinical evaluation and post-marketing clinical follow-up, clinical investigations. So basically, we are talking about clinical studies, and some cases, clinical trials. Therefore, there is a convergence from the medical device arena being closer, is not exactly the same, but closer to the drugs development. Post-marketing surveillance system, risk management and quality management system, that's very fundamental for launching a product into the market. And a new medical device coordination group, which oversee and provide harmonized interpretation of all the regulations. I wanted to mention, because I think that many of you are involved in developing something related to software. And this is very popular today, where we have many products related to health, let's call, and you probably have heard about the digital health. Well, many of the digital health tools are considered medical devices, but not all of them. Therefore, there is a new rule, number 11, which is specific for software. And then these allow to be clear on how the software is classified and should be developed. I must say that we have some cases where the software could be classified as class 3, class 2B, but most of the software are today classified class 1, which, for you to know, make the life easier for the developers of these tools. Moving to the regulatory development strategy, very basic principle regarding how you establish a development strategy for a product. And there are three main issues. One is the regulatory, another is the market, another is the reimbursement. And we will come back to the reimbursement more than once. Probably if this slide was shown, I don't know, 15 years ago or even more, this angle of the reimbursement will not be here. But it became more and more important. And today, having a clue on reimbursement issues is an essential part for access to the different European markets. But additionally, we have now to consider patients from the importance that the patient organization and the patients themselves are having on the regulatory committees. By the way, there are all the committees at the European Medicines Agency have patient representatives, and sometimes the voice of the patients are of major importance on the debates and sometimes in the resolutions from the committees. But also emergencies. When we have had recently the case of the COVID-19, we have experienced something that before it was only few times and with less impact developed, and it's how the agency reacts in case of emergencies. And we have to be prepared for the future as well. In fact, the experience from the COVID-19 has been one of the trigger points for the new, for the project of the new pharma European legislation. When you are with your product, you have to define the product. And this could seem quite obvious, but it's not. Sometimes there are developers, companies, academic groups that come to the EMA and say, well, we have this, but I don't know exactly what it is. Even sometimes they don't know exactly how to use it. That's another thing, another complication. But the first one is to define the product. And therefore, you have to go thoroughly to all the potential aspects, whether it is a biological and a small molecule, an advanced therapy, it is a medical device or an IVD, it is a combination product, it's a borderline, and therefore I have to do something to clarify exactly what the product is. Second, definition of indications, depending on what you go. And then strategically will be very important to define what is the measure, the main indication you want to target, and how strong is your preclinical and basic scientific information to support that. Definition of regions, where you want to go first, no? Is for Asian populations, is for African populations, is for mainly for Europe initially, Europe and US only, etc. That's an important clarification. Then if it's an orphan, so targeting a disease with a prevalence below the level established in Europe. If this is an unmet medical need, fundamental question, as you will see later, and then how it affects to pediatrics. So I want to do, you know that, for example, in pediatrics, most of the companies are scared to invest on pediatrics because the return of investment is much lower than in adult population. However, there are regulations which are obliging them to develop into the pediatrics. Therefore, it's very important that you clarify whether your adult indication is also for children or not, if it's for a particular subset of children, if it's only for children and not for adults, and then how to manage that. That's an important part of the composition of your strategy. I strongly recommend to have interactions with regulators in terms of the indications, in terms of development. Don't mix what is a strategy and what is a tactic. So the interaction with the regulators in terms of questions, type of meeting, and so on, It's a tactic. It's not a strategy. You have to fix exactly what's your strategy for the regulatory development. In Europe, you have that the EMEA covering approximately 95% of the new active substance. You can get all this type of let's say services and mandatory ways. For example, some therapeutic areas are mandatory. You cannot go through the mutual recognition. Excuse me. And a number of potential interactions, while the member states also are very important in terms of medical devices, clinical nutrition, and clinical trials. In case that you go to the US, remember, there are no member states. Well, that's a different approach. Almost everything is under the FDA. I mentioned here the two main groups, the CDER and the CBER, but there are more. There are medical devices. But for example, in the case of the FDA, the agency is responsible for the clinical trials. As in Europe and as the EMEA is also responsible for orphan and pediatrics, but they have different types of responsibilities, and also the interaction is not exactly the same. Therefore, you have to be aware on which are the different types of meetings with the FDA and which is the one fitting better your interest and your objective of the interaction with them. Let's move to the final point regarding the current EU pharma legislation. We have today, this is just the main, what I mentioned at the beginning. This is, I'm not will read that. It's only for your reference to know which are exactly the main directive and regulations affecting to the main regulatory activities in Europe, but there are more than that, but these are the main one. And the new European regulation will try to create a single, to reinforce, I would say, a single market for medicine. This was already an objective when the EMEA and the centralized procedure were started, but there are still a number of, let's say, weak parts on that, on that picture, no? Then a number of, I will not read exactly all the objectives, this is up to you, but all the intentions from the new legislations are very nice, as usual. So we have to decrease the administrative burden, to be more effective, to facilitate availability of medicines to all member states, to all the citizens in Europe, etc., etc. And very important from my point of view, but I want to highlight this, is that the legislation itself emphasized the need for addressing antimicrobial resistant issues. And this is a long-standing health problem in Europe and worldwide. And I think it's very important that the program from the European Commission is including this topic even in the highlights of the legislation. We will come back to that matter later, briefly. Then there are two, for the time being, so everything that I would say here may change tomorrow. Let's say, I'm trying to let you know what I know today. But you have to know also that this is an ongoing process with many stakeholders, with a lot of consultations. Therefore, one of the recommendations that you will see at the end of my presentation is please monitor what is going on the European Commission website to understand exactly the future on that. But basically, there will be a new directive and a new regulation. These will be the main two regulatory tax bodies that will mandate the future. And also the reform will include a number of council recommendations on antimicrobial resistance. As I say, the Commission is giving a lot of importance to this topic. Among other things, this directive and regulation will simplify the procedures and revamp the EMEA structure. And here we will see more than one, potentially more than one earthquake. Early scientific advice for the EMEA, pushing for more rolling review approach. And of course, this is one of the lessons learned from the recent emergency with the COVID-19, where rolling review was of the tools put in place. Also, the developers of innovative products will receive advice even earlier during the development, and will be let's say, I wouldn't say intensive, but an increased use of real world evidence. Only few years ago, the real world evidence was not considered as a measure supporting data from the regulators. And here is I think that is an important step forward. Also, provisions on repurposing, that's also an important thing, and the high unmet medical needs. The structure of the EMEA will probably be changed, will remain the human medicinal product, sorry for the acronym because it's not correct, and the safety committee, but the orphan pediatrics and advanced therapy committees will be discontinued. This is not yet approved. I repeat this again, is not yet approved, but this is the current written, by the way, approach from the European Commission. An inspectorate also, there will be a list of critical medicines for the entire EU. It will be strengthened the environmental risk assessment of medicines. This is already in place, but will be reinforced. And also there will be some changes regarding the timelines for approving medicines, and including this call for measured public health interest that today will be the equivalent to the today accelerated assessment. No, we will see how this look like in the final version. And for the medicines of rare diseases, excuse me, because I wanted to show this first. The main points, there are many things on the new regulatory strategy, but I wanted to emphasize how will change this triangle of unmet medical need, pediatric, rare diseases. No? And there is a strong commitment from the Commission to modify that dramatically, and to allow a better coordination of the three concepts for new medicines. For medicines for rare diseases will be a number of changes regarding the time that it is allowed for a medicine. For example, today, remember that we have a standard market exclusivity of 10 years. It will be reduced to 9, but there will be a number of options that are described here that may extend the regulatory production period, the regulatory protection periods up to a maximum of 13 years. Then another important thing is fulfilling the unmet medical need. No, the definition of the unmet medical need that's an important thing. It's not what the clinicians say that they need. I'm sorry about that, but is what, from a regulatory point of view, when there is a disease or a disease where there is not a product approved to treat it. Therefore, this is what is called unmet medical need. And that's an important thing because the unmet medical need is a fundamental piece for a number of regulatory procedures, for example, the PRIME, conditional marketing authorization, orphan, pediatrics, etc. So that's an important point for the concept of unmet medical need. The new pharmaceutical strategy will include, as I mentioned, the orphan and pediatric legislation review with the view of the concept of the unmet medical need. Therefore, there will be changes, as I already mentioned briefly, on the orphan legislation in terms of the exclusivity periods, in the way of having changes on the current criteria for ODD. I'm extremely curious what this would mean. I cannot tell you exactly what the consequences of these criteria, but I believe that this will be important. And also, if we move to the right-hand side, when we will see the pediatric diseases, there will be a link between the 6-month SPC extension reward to place a product on the market, or medicines addressing a medical need, etc. There will be a number of important changes on these domains. Antimicrobial also, this is, as I mentioned, one of the health action plans, very important from the European perspective. I must say that in the past, and I personally was involved in initiative for promoting the development of antimicrobial, and always we had a response from classical pharma industry saying, well, this is not a sufficient return of investment for that. However, now is the time that the Commission have decided that they should provide additional funds to clearly go ahead on this topic. From the European perspective, not only from African and other regions, worldwide regions where this initiative will also have an important impact, but only for Europeans, the impact will be dramatic, considering the epidemiological data on how the current infections for European citizens and the availability of antibiotics is affecting to the mortality and morbidity, which I can tell you that the figures are not very nice. Therefore, that will be a very important issue. And just finally, a number of take-home messages. You can add or delete, whatever you want, but I believe that one is promoting innovation. Don't be afraid on the regulatory complexities. If you believe that the regulatory issues are complex, I can tell you that, well, there are some complexity, but at the end of the day, this should be to help the public health on improving. Therefore, the regulatory agencies will provide help, honestly, to improve your developments. Set up an early dialogue with the relevant regulatory authorities. Follow the scientific and regulatory guidelines, but if you need to deviate, do it, and provide a good justification and discussion with the regulators. So the regulations, in terms of guidelines, scientific, particularly more than the regulatory guidelines, the scientific guidelines sometimes become obsolete over time, or they are not all the aspects have been covered by the guidelines. Therefore, don't be afraid about this issue and provide an appropriate justification. Consider always a European scope and even international and not only local. Be bold on challenging classical development principles, but with a strong science. That's the important thing. Provide everything supported by a strong science. Thinking about marketing authorization, so thinking about the future, even that you see the future very in a very long journey, but you need to think about that from almost the very beginning. Thinking on reimbursement, as we mentioned before, and follow the amendments to the existing MD and IVD regulations. We did not discuss this in depth, but there are many. So the whole system for medical devices and IVD in Europe is quite stressed with the new regulations. Not all the notified bodies are appropriately in place and with all the resources. So probably we are expecting some potential amendments to the existing regulations. And finally, follow the progress of the new EU pharma regulation, as I already say. And thank you very much for your attention. We have still 11 minutes for question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this really insightful presentation, and to also take the challenge of deliver a presentation on this complete topic. I saw that in the chat we have one question from Mary Che, which is, in your opinion, the effect of discontinuing the pediatric committee?
I don't know. That's one of the major question marks, because what we have still to see is that the content of the pediatric committee will not be discontinued in terms of the legislation itself. So I believe, look at, perhaps because I'm becoming old, and then I will talk about the history. The history is that before the pediatric committee, it was a very strong working party on pediatrics at the EMA. And this working party at that time took a number of responsibilities. The pediatric regulation was not issue at that time, but there were many pediatric issues, and all of them were discussed within the working party for pediatrics and then referred back to the CHMP. I don't know if this is going to be the way, but apparently what the European Commission is proposing is that the CHMP is taking more relevant role for the whole medicines. Probably, I would say for sure, because there is no other way, they have to decentralize to working parties or other kind of structure the discussion on specific topics. We can say approximately the same for orphans, for example. No, orphans will be a key point as well, where I can see the CHMP as it is today in charge of everything, and that could be a mess. So, but what I can tell you is that whatever is the discontinuation of the pediatric committee confirmed, which is today is what is announced, the content of the pediatric legislation is not being to be, will be some changes, but it will continue as a specific legislation.
Thank you a lot. I don't know if someone has a question. If you feel so, you can also ask it directly and open your mic to ask to Xavier.
Okay.
Maybe I have a question for you. On you mentioned digital health.
Yeah.
Which tips would you have on digital health for a company within the medical device regulation to help them to, as you say, to not be afraid of the regulation and to go on?
What we have to have is a couple of clear analysis of the product. The first one is the intended of use. What do you intend to do with that? And what's the consequence of the use? If the consequence is a therapeutic decision in terms of treatment, in terms of diagnostic, in terms of whatever, this can go in one direction or in another, no? So many digital, not many, some digital health products are not a medical device. And we have defined, and the relevant notified bodies that we have consulted have been in agreement that there is not, they are not a medical device category for this particular product. But many of the others should be analyzed, and then with the consequence of that, one important good news from my point of view is that many of them will be classified as class 1. Therefore, the development and the regulatory procedures are much easier than for any other class. But the important thing is to sit and look at exactly the details in depth of the product, how it acts, how it is intended to use, what is the consequence of the use, etc., etc. And with these 4, 5, 6 main items, we can, I think, relatively easily classify the product accordingly.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Well, if there is no other question, you can contact me at any time by my email or through Charlotte and the EIT Health Group. Okay.
Yes, it seems that there is no other question. So yes, thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Xavier, for this presentation. I will just share with you if you want to contact us, or also to be aware of the next training capsule. So we had this one on regulatory, and the next one that we will have to follow on the topic that you also mentioned, to think about the reimbursement. We will have our 5th training capsule in 13th of May about digital devices in pediatric and how to be successful in the reimbursement strategy.
Very interesting.
So if you want to subscribe, you can follow us on LinkedIn, also in the i4Kids webpage, or you can join us in the innovator community, where we have a dedicated group to pediatrics, where you can really participate and add value. So I will send all of this through the chat, and yeah, with all of that, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.